for anyone who can't make it. And what I might do is share my screen and just start getting through a few points that I've got laid out for us to go through today. Can everyone see my screen then? Yep, great, okay. Okay, so you can see at the top here of the sheet I've just got outlined, I've got some housekeeping points there. So we've obviously talked about the mid-semester exam quite heavily last week. You've obviously got a lot of information about it online, but it is the one that's coming in terms of assessments. And so I'm sure people have got more questions, which I'd love to answer today. What I can tell you is that it will go live on the 15th of April, so Wednesday next week. You'll have a mid-semester exam. Now that may be its own module that we create for that, or it might be in the assessments module, but it'll go live. Now we're creating a series of mid-semester exams, each with an article attached to the first question. So you'll only have access to one. I'm not quite sure at this stage whether you're going to see all of them there and only have access to one. So the others will be sort of grayed out, or whether you'll just see one. But either way, everyone only have access to one, and you'll have a different article from most other students. That'll be contained, a link to that PDF will be contained in the first question, but all of the questions will be specific to your article. You can take that test anytime between when it opens up on Wednesday to when it shuts down on Sunday of that week. So we will have one more video conference before that time, but then opens up the time period. Just like the quizzes you've been having, where you can take those anytime during the week, you'll be able to take that mid-semester exam anytime between Wednesday and Sunday. Now, in terms of time frame, that when you open that up, how much time have you got to complete that mid-semester exam? At the moment, we're working on 50 minutes to an hour. So we've still got to finalize that, and I'll let you know in the email at the end of the week. But either way, 50 minutes or an hour, you should have plenty of time to sit that mid-semester exam. So that does include reading through the article, which shouldn't take you too long. It'll include about 15 multi-choice questions. It will have 3 short answer questions and 1 long answer question. Now that long answer question will be writing the conclusion paragraph that's missing from that abstract. So that abstract will be about 3 pages long, and it'll be missing a conclusion paragraph. So that you'll be writing that conclusion paragraph as the last question on that online mid-semester exam. Okay, so maybe any questions? Obviously I've outlined a little bit there and we've talked about it before, but any quick questions about the mid-semester exam before we go any further? Right. Okay. So the next housekeeping point that you can see I've got there is the descriptive stats content, which I might just quickly show you the Leo page at the moment, what we've got. Okay, so you'll notice this is all what I can see, which is obviously more than you guys see on your student view, but this descriptive statistics module has come up this week. Now, what you might have seen in some of the details of the unit is there's actually 10 content modules and quizzes through the semester. So while it's almost weekly, there are 2 weeks where you won't have a content module or quiz. Now week 12 is one of those weeks because we have our group research project due. We also have a competency exam in week 12. So that, I've just got a couple of questions I'll answer there from the chat, which is great. So week 12, we don't have a content, but we do have a, usually we don't have a content module in week 6 as well to help you prepare for the mid-semester exam. Now, because of this online format that we've got, that starts to get a little bit complex because next week, you'll have the mid-semester exam, and if you've also got a content module that week, they may clash a little bit or cause a bit of difficulty for some later in the week. So what we're doing is opening up the descriptive stats module. So that's opened up as of yesterday. But if I click in there, what you'll see, oopsie, I'm not logged into it, there we go, is a description saying is open from yesterday up until the end of next week, so week 7. So that is actually basically what we're doing is giving you guys 2 weeks to prepare for the mid-semester exam, complete the mid-semester exam, as well as do the content module for the first stats concepts. So that's available week 6 and 7. So it's available from yesterday to the 19th of April. You don't have to do it this week, but it is something that over the next 2 weeks, if you can get onto that. I've already seen a few people have gone on and looked at the lectures, and a few people have done the quiz already, which is great. But yeah, if you don't want to tackle that until after your mid-semester exam next week, that's fine as well. Any questions on that? I might also answer the questions from the group chat. Someone said it's an open book. Yes, it is open book exam. So we obviously can't restrict that if you're sitting at home on your own computer. So it is open book, but that's where the time frame comes into it. So I think giving you guys sort of around 50 minutes an hour is plenty of time to do it, but it's probably not plenty of time if you haven't prepared very well for the mid-semester exam. Yeah. Any other questions on the mid-semester exam or the descriptive stats content that I've just posted up? No? Okay. So then what we might do is transition into the activity just to make sure we're all on the same page and working towards the mid-semester exam. So what I've done is quickly outline some of the key concepts from the semester so far that you are likely to get questions focused on in the mid-semester exam. This shouldn't be a surprise. You've got questions in your quizzes so far on these questions. We've talked about these in the face-to-face activities as well as the online activities, tutorials. You've got questions on all of these. So hopefully this is pretty similar to the list that you'd come up with of key concepts. But, you know, we are going to get you are going to get questions, I can tell you, on pretty much each of these dot points. So they are important to be prepared around. What I might do though, rather than just going through those and checking everyone's okay with those, I think probably what's better is to do a little bit like we did last week, take a research example and then kind of work through our way through those key concept areas to make sure everyone's up to speed. So the one that I've come up with for this week that I think might be nice to have a chat about is a focus of fitness on and patients post-knee surgery. So let's say in particular we're interested in the 2 different types of fitness. So depending on our study design, and we're going to play around with that a little bit with you guys, we might be interested in the general cardio fitness, so VO2 reflected by VO2 max, or specific leg strength fitness, or both of those potentially, on patients who are 6 to 12 months post-surgery. And you'll see here I've also restricted it to 25 to 65-year-olds, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So I've given a bit of details here about the sample we might look at and about the dependent variables, but then we'll go through, you can see these underscored topic areas, which, you know, like I've said, I can pretty much tell you're going to get questions on in the mid-semester exam. So the first one being ethical considerations. So there's a list of ethical considerations we went through in the face-to-face class and the content from Ethics and Law Week that you can pretty much apply to any research area that you're going, or topic or experiment that you're going into, that you can kind of systematically say, okay, this is important. Have I considered this? Have I considered that? Can anyone give me any of those off the top of their head? Feel free to use the chat. I've got that open as well, or you can just yell out. Any ideas? Okay. I'll start.
I think it's important that measures are taken so that no further damage is made on the knees just because they are an at-risk population.
Yeah, great one. Yeah. Yep, so at-risk populations is definitely one that we need to consider. And certainly if we're talking about fitness and exercise and measuring things like leg strength and VO2 max, then this population is certainly an at-risk population. We know that they potentially don't have the greatest strength, or they're at a much higher risk of recurrence of injury during this time frame. So yeah, at-risk population is a really good one. Any others? Informed consent is a really good one as well, or is an important one to remember. So whatever our research topic is, getting that informed consent, which is both fully informing participants as much as we can of the intentions and procedures of the research, as well as getting their consent, ideally written consent, is going to be an important ethical consideration. So a couple more. Okay, Jess, I can see you've added on the chat down there. Older part of the age group would be at risk of heart failure. Yeah, for sure. So as they get older there, that's definitely something, yeah, before doing the test. So good. So I think that probably fits into the at-risk population, but I like how you're specifically thinking about the research design as well. If we were to give another broad category, would there be any that people could give? Okay, so disclosure of findings is going to be important. Confidentiality is going to be important. Rod's got down there, added to the chat, saying inform of the purpose. Yeah, for sure. So that's going to be part of informed consent, but that's a really good one, Rod. There's a couple more out there on the list that we've got, but what I might do is leave maybe you guys to have a little look back at that. So it is one that in mid-semester exams past that students do miss out on a couple of these. So it's something I'd recommend having a bit of a look at before next week's exam and having a bit of a list to come to in terms of ethical considerations. So we've got sample here. In terms of a question around sample in the mid-semester exam, it may be as simple as sample size, so how many participants. We may have a question around sampling procedures. So is it truly random sampling that we have done in this experiment, etc.? But I think that's pretty straightforward. So we might move on. Now I've got a couple of dependent variables here for us to kind of wrap our heads around, but I'm kind of interested to get your thoughts on what a dependent variable is. Now, that's not something we're necessarily going to ask you to outline or define, but we are going to ask you to identify a dependent variable or dependent variables of the research that you look at, the abstract that you see in the mid-semester exam. So can anyone in their own words give me how they would identify a dependent variable, what kind of the giveaways or telltale signs are?
I'd probably say it's more so looking at measuring what's changed during the experiment.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it, Mitch, is what's changed. So what measure are you taking? So it's something we have to measure. Not all variables we measure. In fact, we only typically measure a few variables in our research. It's something that we measure and that we're tracking a change on. So that's a good description of a dependent variable. Jess, you put down in the chat there, it's general and not individual to participants. So yeah, so it's something that we typically can perform, group the participant data together with and perform some sort of analysis on. So those are good sort of descriptions of dependent variable. So those are things we can do with the VO2 max test. So it could be something that we measure all participants on, and we either compare across two groups, or we might be looking for a relationship between two different dependent variables like VO2 max or leg strength, or we could just report, say, VO2 max of that population which might provide some really important normative data for clinicians out there. So those sort of be some examples of dependent variables. Independent variables. So independent variable is anything that we can compare our data across. Let's say we're looking at VO2 max. What could we break our participants into groups on and then compare that across? Some examples of independent variables we might introduce to this research. Yeah, Rod's got age. Rod and Jess have both got age on the chat, which is great. Gender, excellent. Okay, now both of these are active or attribute independent variables? Attribute. So we're not deciding on age or gender. Participants are coming to us with that. I can see Riley's got down there another suggestion, which is months post-op. And Jess has also put down type of knee surgery, which is great. So this would also be attribute. Dictating that. Type of knee surgery could be attribute or active, depending on whether we're looking at, tracking from surgeries that have already occurred, or whether that's part of our experimental design is looking at the effect of two different surgeries. So let's say that we're looking at that as an active independent variable. Others might include exercise intervention, maybe some sort of supplement intervention. So we've really got an almost endless list of things that we could use as independent variables, okay? Now, what you'll notice is in full journal article or in larger experimental studies that you read in most journal articles, they actually tend to have more than one independent variable. So they usually have a number of different dependent variables and maybe more than one independent variable, and you can see that the analysis gets quite complex. In our research projects that we're doing in groups this semester, I'd probably encourage you guys to have maybe one dependent variable and one independent variable to keep it nice and simple. The abstracts that we're going to read for the mid-semester exam, they may have a few dependent variables, a few independent variables, but they're probably not going to be super complex, partly because they're, the level that they're reporting at is an abstract for a conference, but also because we've deliberately chosen them to be not super complex, so you can assess them for the mid-semester exam reasonably simply, okay? So those are some really good independent variables. There are also a lot of these, if not all of these, actually could be, if they're not an independent variable, they would be an extraneous variable. So remember, extraneous variables are anything that can influence our dependent variable. So let's say anything that could influence VO2 max of a participant that's not our chosen independent variable. So let's say our chosen independent variable is an exercise intervention. So extraneous variables then would be age, gender, type of knee surgery, supplements, other diet, fitness, pre-surgery, all sorts of other things, okay? So anything that could influence the VO2 max that's not the exercise intervention. Now, when we have our extraneous variables, we kind of have to make decisions as researchers whether we're controlling for those or whether we're not controlling for those. And the more we control for those, the more we are improving our internal validity or increasing our internal validity, but we're lessening our external validity. Jess, I noticed you put down genetics in there. Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things studying human participants as well, is that there is going to be an almost endless list of extraneous variables. So genetics, background, behaviors, attitudes, all of those things are going to influence our end results. And so exercise intervention specifically, we know that people respond to exercise differently. We have some people who respond to the stimulus of exercise very acutely and to a much greater extent than others. We have some people out there who just don't respond to exercise. We call them exercise non-responders. And so actually that stimulus doesn't work in the same way as our typical, as sort of others do and typically in the population, and they actually don't see the anabolic effects or improvements from an exercise stimulus. So all of those things will influence our dependent variables. That's not our independent variables. So say if we try and control for age, we control for gender, we're only looking at, say, females, we control for the type of knee surgery. The more we do that, the more we're improving our internal validity. Jess, I can see you've put down there as well that exercise non-responders, would that be an extraneous variable? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we might want to control for that. We might want to look at people's past history of exercise and see if they do have indications of being an exercise non-responder. We might control for that, not having them in our population. So extraneous variables, you'll definitely get questions about that. Internal external validity, and in particular the internal external validity, the relationship between that, the extraneous variables, and the basic applied continuum. So you might get a question around if we're controlling for more extraneous variables, is that going to increase or decrease our external validity? And so it's going to decrease our external validity the more we control for these extraneous variables, because we're less sure that the findings will be applicable to the outside world, because in the outside world we don't control for extraneous variables. Okay, they're all part of the picture. Controlling, not controlling for extraneous variables influences our internal external validity as a trade-off, but there's something that we can do that increases both our internal and external validity. What? What do you think? Any ideas? It's not always an obvious one. So I think people do tend to struggle with that one a little bit. It's the sample size. So there are certain factors, sample size being the big one, that improves both internal and external validity. So that's not a trade-off aspect. See, Jess, you've added in there number of female participants or number for gender. Yeah, so the more we have, say if we include both genders, that's going to improve our external validity. Depends on our numbers. If that sacrifices the total numbers, well, then that's potentially going to limit our internal validity. So we're not sure whether it's the gender difference that's playing a role in the difference we're seeing, or the lack of difference we're seeing in the dependent variable. But if we have more numbers overall, so say instead of having 50 participants overall who are all male, we add another 50 females, now we have a greater sample size and we have both genders. So now we have greater external validity and we have greater internal validity. And so sample size is one that actually, it's always better the more participants we have, because it better represents the population. However, not easy to get a higher sample size. That also feeds into limitations and delimitations. So limitations, so delimitations both of these are restrictions of a study, but delimitations are a chosen restriction of a study. Okay, so limitations might include a small sample size, because maybe we didn't have a choice. We could only collect this small number of participants. It could be something that just wasn't seen by the authors or experimenters. So maybe they had used a measure that wasn't particularly valid, or an instrument that wasn't particularly valid. Maybe that was a choice. Maybe that was just something that they weren't aware of the lack of validity of that measure, and therefore that's a restriction of the study that we might pick up later on. Whereas a delimitation is a chosen restriction of the study, which we've already kind of looked at in terms of controlling our extraneous variables. Even up here, for example, we've restricted the age, or I've said at the start, we'll restrict the age to 25 to 65-year-olds. If we do that, well, that's going to be a delimitation of our study. Again, it's lessening the external validity of our research, because we're not sure if that's now applicable to 75-year-olds. But including 75-year-olds in our research introduces a number of other issues like neurological decline, a decrease in fitness level, and a whole range of other factors as well. Jess, I see you've included there something like different brands of treadmills. So for cardiovascular testing, I'm assuming. Yeah, potentially. So it depends a little. I mean, this is part of the instrumentation we've got down here as well. Often we can do, even within the same data collection, we might use a couple of different treadmill designs in a few different labs, but we've got to make sure they have very much the same conditions. So obviously if there are differences, significant differences in those treadmills, and especially things like, we know there's very solid research telling us that our running mechanics and even physiological output and demands are quite different between treadmill running and overground run. So you wouldn't want to have both of those in the same experiment. Okay, so basic applied continuum of classification is similar in a way to instrument reliability, objectivity, validity, in that, and I mentioned this last week, that we're not going to ask you for nuanced details of your opinion about a particular, so is it more basic or is it more applied, you know, rate the objectivity of the instrument they used in this article. But what we're going to get to is that you understand what those concepts mean. So we're going to frame it a little bit for you in a question in the mid-semester exam. So let's say that let's take what we've done so far. Say we've got this, we're looking at exercise intervention and its effect on VO2 max. Let's say that the exercise intervention is one that a number in the rehab community use already or could use as best practice for their patients, and therefore is directly informing practice. Would that be more basic or more applied research, you think? What do you think if it can be used directly straight away by practitioners? Yeah, thanks, Mitch. It's applied. So anything that can be used in the outside world straight away or answers a direct problem that people have in the outside world, well, that's going to be more applied research. Anything that's aimed more towards advancing our knowledge or a methodological sort of understanding, then that's going to be more basic research. And so we'll frame it in a question like that to get your understanding of it, not so much the nuance in the continuum of that. Qualitative or quantitative, that should be fairly straightforward. If we're measuring VO2 max and comparing that between two groups, what do you think? Apply qualitative or quantitative? Thoughts? Sorry. So qualitative or quantitative, if we're measuring VO2 max using and comparing groups on exercise intervention, yeah, thanks, Rod. Quantitative, yeah, nice, okay. So you will get a question on that in the mid-semester exam, and hopefully that's the easiest question you get. If we're using numbers, if we're collecting numerical data in the research, then it's quantitative research. So that should be fairly easy for you. Experimental, non-experimental subcategories. So we've got classic experimental, we've got causal comparative, we've got correlational, we've got descriptive, and we've got historic. Okay, so those are the major experimental, non-experimental categories of research. If we are using this exercise intervention as our active independent variable, then which one of these would best classify the research? Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So if we're using exercise intervention, that would be classic experimental design. If we were using gender or age or another attribute independent variable, it would be causal comparative. If we were doing VO2 max versus leg strength, sorry, okay, so we're looking at the relationship between VO2 max and leg strength there, then that would be correlational. If we were just doing normative data on VO2 max of that population, which might be quite informative for clinicians to have some normative data, VO2 max of patients 6 to 12 months post knee surgery, that would be descriptive. Historic, we don't use very much in exercise science. So that would be looking back on historical cases of fitness in post-knee surgery, which would be really difficult to do. So typically we won't have an example of that one. But depending on the independent variable, the type, the dependent variable, then you'll have different types of design there in terms of the experimental, non-experimental. So you'll definitely get a question around that one in the mid-semester exam. You'll have a question around instrument reliability, objectivity, validity. Okay, so like I mentioned before, that won't be you know, rate the objectivity of a study, but it might be something like, you know, what are the 3 considerations for instrumentation? It might be something around specifically different aspects of that. So, you know, is the VO2 max measurement, if it's, you know, quite consistent between different testers, what is the consideration that's more likely to affect reliability, objectivity, or validity? So remember, objectivity is the between different testers, reliability is the consistency from the same tester, and validity is how well that measure is representing what you are meaning to it to represent. So is VO2 measurement a valid representation of cardiovascular fitness? You might say yes to that, okay, or it might be rated pretty highly on that. But again, you won't be asked to rate that, but you will be asked about your understanding of those. Common research errors. So we've got things like the placebo effect. We've got the John Henry effect, or reverse. We've got halo effect. We've got central tendency effect. We've got the Hawthorne effect. We've got post error. Okay. There's a couple more I think that were listed there. But this is quite a lot. Okay, so let's say we're looking at that, we've still got exercise intervention as our active independent variable. So we're comparing 2 different groups in exercise intervention on their VO2 max test. So which of these common research errors do you think would be at play? Any ideas? Throw it down in the chat if you want. Hawthorne, yeah, definitely. Hawthorne effect is a bit of a gimme, hopefully in the mid-semester exam, because I can't think of too much research in exercise science that wouldn't have the Hawthorne effect. So it would only be studies where people didn't know they were being analysed, which obviously raises some pretty serious ethical considerations there. So pretty much every research you will get in the mid-semester exam will have the Hawthorne effect. So that should be something fairly simple to throw down there. We've got Rod said John Henry, and that's true. Yeah, absolutely. So especially if participants know that they're in a control condition, or another group is getting something that they think is going to be an effect. So if we have exercise intervention, if we've got one control group that knows they're the control group that's not getting a particular exercise intervention, and there's another group that is getting an exercise intervention, you could definitely have the John Henry effect. So they could actually go out and be doing more exercise because they know that they're being compared against an exercise group, or maybe they do less exercise because they know that the exercise group is going to do better anyway, so they may as well not do any exercise at all. So definitely the John Henry or reverse John Henry effect is going to come into, or potentially in play there. We've potentially got a placebo effect as well. You know that you're getting an exercise intervention if you're in the exercise intervention, and whether you're having the best physiological response from that or not, thinking that it is going to benefit you is likely to have some beneficial effects. So potentially a placebo effect. Potentially maybe some of the others as well. Post hoc error is a little bit tricky because it does depend on what the researchers are writing up. So that's probably one that is always in play, but I'd probably be careful using it in the mid-semester exam. But certainly these other ones would definitely be important, or ones that you could list for this one that we've talked about. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the research methods concepts. The last type of question you're going to get in the mid-semester exam is on academic writing. So you may get a question or two in the multiple choice and or short answer questions that have to do with what's expected of different aspects of an abstract. So for example, where would you find the aims of an abstract? So which section? Results, discussion, conclusion, methods, introduction. Any ideas? Yeah, intro for sure. Where would be end of the intro specifically from Jess? Fantastic. Yeah, that's exactly where you'd want to find them. So that's the convention, is that we're really setting up the gap in the literature, the understanding of the variables in the introduction, and that feeds into the aim of our research, which is at the end of the introduction section. I know you could put quite a lot of things in here, but specifically, what do some of us want to put in a results section, or sometimes we see in a results section, but it shouldn't be in the results section? Jess has immediately put up discussion, which is exactly right. Yeah. So sometimes we have a joint results / discussion section, and then that might be easier for some people to link or report the results directly in with the meaning of those results, and that's great. But if we've just got a results section, then we shouldn't have any discussion, we shouldn't have any context. It should just be what the findings were specifically in terms of the stats, and whether that be descriptive or inferential, and then you save any discussion or context for the discussion section, so that you might get a question like that in the mid-semester exam. The other aspect of that you'll get, the last bit that you'll get, which is obviously hopefully fairly clear, is the applied aspect of academic writing, so writing that conclusion section. So the best preparation for that is the academic writing activity that's online. It's been online this week. So you've got 3 tasks in there. The first one's around introduction. The second and third tasks are specifically around conclusion sections, and the third task is writing a conclusion paragraph. So I will be posting the answers up from that activity over the next couple of days. So I'll post up a little PDF document that actually has the order of the conclusion paragraphs in task 2, as well as the actual conclusion paragraph that the authors did for that abstract. That doesn't necessarily mean that if your conclusion paragraph is different from what the authors wrote, which I'm sure it will be different to some degree, that doesn't mean that theirs is better than yours necessarily. In fact, I've seen a number of student conclusion paragraphs that are probably better than what the authors have written. So I would have a look at what they put in there, compare it against yours in terms of what the conclusions are. But what I'd encourage you also to do is feel free to send me your conclusion paragraph. Hopefully I've got a little time to be able to give you a little bit of feedback via email maybe. But what I'd also like to do is present a couple of those anonymously next week in the video chat. and we can sort of maybe give some feedback as a group on what could be improved or what's good about people's different paragraphs. Same goes for others. So obviously you want to practice as much as possible. So if you can find other research articles out there or abstracts, as many as you can, really read them, ignore the conclusion paragraph and write your own in there. Then same thing, the better practice you get. And if you want feedback on that, email it to me. Hopefully I can get back to you, but also what I'd love to do is have as many of those possible for the video check next week. Just checking in on the chat, I can see that Jess, you've said the activity, it is in the academic writing module. So if you head in there, it'll be a little folder and then you've got a Word doc and a PDF. Yeah, so probably, yeah, email the paragraph to me. If you want to post it up in the forum on Leo, that's no problem at all. But if you're happy to email to me, then I'm more than happy to get back to you as well on that one. Okay, so that pretty much takes us through what the questions are that you're going to get in the mid-semester exam, and hopefully, we're all on the same page, or you have an idea of where you need to get to for the different concepts. Before we move on to the group research projects, is there any more questions on the mid-semester exam questions or content?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the part where you said how many multiple choice and how many short answer questions there were.
Yeah, so there's going to be about 15 multi-choice questions. We're going to have 3 short answer questions. So the short answer questions aren't going to ask you to write sentences. They're going to be asking you to list things. And then we've got the long answer question, which is write a conclusion paragraph.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, guys? No. We do still have another video chat before the mid-semester exam, but hopefully we're all tracking pretty well towards it. Okay, so the final thing I mentioned we want to do today is get into your groups and sort of further those discussions on the group research project. So hopefully what you can see here is I've just got up there. Important in terms of where we're tracking for that group research project is kind of to figure out where we need to end up and maybe track back from there. So remember, end of week 12 is when we're submitting this thing, and that's write up, analysis, they've completed the data collection and everything. And so I think the latest you want to be doing your data analysis, your statistics, is in week 11. So hopefully if you're doing that week 11 at the latest, then I can jump in on a Google Sheet or in a video conference. I can have a look at what you've been doing and give you some feedback on that. So then we want to have our data collected by the latest week 10. So hopefully if you're collecting data in week 9, 10, then the step we need to do before that is for me to have a look at your draft of the application form, the information sheet, and the consent form. Okay, so that's not the final product. You're not getting marked on that, but I want to see a draft of those so I know what your research looks like from the application form, and I know the information sheet and the consent form that you are going to be giving out to participants. So I'd really want that at the latest by the end of week 8. So that still leaves us a bit of time to get those drafts up and design the project and all that sort of stuff. But it is something we want to start getting on top of. So I know people are in different spots at the moment. We've got some groups who are together who have come up with a project topic already and started designing. We've got others who aren't in a group yet, which is understandable given all the things that have been going on. But yeah, hopefully by the end of this week, what I'd really like for people to be on track is to make sure they've got a group, have a topic or a question specifically within a topic, have had a look at the background literature, so understand a little bit of the variables and how they interact with each other and some of the choices they have, and then have a bit of a draft of design. So next week in the video conference, what I really want is every group being able to tell me, okay, this is what we're thinking about in terms of the variables, the things we're going to measure, how we're going to set it up and all that sort of stuff. And then I can say, okay, have you considered this? Or maybe, why are you doing that aspect there? Can we change that? Giving some modifications before, those drafts come in week 8. Okay. Great. All right. So what I might do, well, I might quickly just, is there any questions on the group research project before we break up into our breakout rooms?
I don't have one about like the research project, but I was just wondering if I could have a chat directly to you at some point, just like a one-on-one, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, are you in a group, Nadine?
Not officially, no, but there's someone else in this like class that we're probably gonna pair up.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So what I might do is I might just get people I might set up the breakout rooms from what I can see on my sign up doc here. Get people into the breakout room, start talking about their project, and then anyone who's not in a room I can chat to, and then I can also have a chat to you as well, Nadine. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. All right. So I might stop the recording here, and then I'll just bear with me as I start to put people in the breakout rooms. Okay, so I'm starting to assign now. So as soon as you see the invite come up, then hop into the room. It might just be you in the room at the moment if your other group members are not there, and then I can just jump in and check with you individually how you're going with that. Okay, we've got Rod, Riley, and Nadine. Are you guys still here with me?
Yeah, so me and Rod are like hoping to pair up.
Yep.
I should be with Jess Williams.
Okay, awesome.
Oh,
Oh, bless you. Thanks, Riley. I'll put you in there now.
Thank you.
sorry, I didn't know you hear that.
Okay. So, Rod, you and Nadine, keen to go in a group together?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay, so I'll just set you up in a group now. Nadine, did you want to still chat one-on-one, or are you happy to chat?
Yeah. It doesn't really matter if Rod knows my predicament that I've been in. I've moved from Queensland to New South Wales when. Oh, hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might just pop you in a group, so then it's just us and no one else jumps in on that one.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay, I'll see you in there in a sec. Hey.
So when the whole like coronavirus thing happened, I was living in I just moved house in Queensland.
Yep.
And when the borders closed, I had to move home for my family because my grandparents, like if they died and they're in New South Wales, like I couldn't get across.
Yeah.
So I first moved down, and as I moved down, I fractured 3 ribs. So I've been in and out of hospital. And then on top of that, I just got given a job as well. So I haven't been able to catch up on like the weekly, like Sunday tests. I was just wondering if it's still possible to do those, to be able to like catch up and even just like be able to be on top of those so that I don't feel like I'm forgetting things and being like,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, are you okay at the moment? Are you okay at the moment?
I've been on endo and Valium for quite some time, which helps. But other than that, like I'm just, 3 fractured ribs is really painful, and I didn't realize how bad that was gonna be. And then to go into like I'm an essential worker at a hospital now as well. So like on top of being in hospital, I'm now working at a hospital.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot of like, I had no idea this one thing after another would just like snowball. So I felt very like disconnected from university because like of moving and then all of this shit going on in between. So I just been wanting to like catch up with all of my teachers and say like, I'm still here. I've just got to catch up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so definitely. I mean, I think just hopefully, and you've got from. I mean, we've chatted before anyway, but yeah, we just want to make sure that you've got as much support as you can have.
Yeah, I'm super lucky. Like living back home with my parents now, like it's taken a whole, because like when everything happened with the coronavirus, I couldn't have a job or anything in Queensland, and then with like sick grandparents, it was just best. Like I moved 2 weeks at like the start of uni, and then I was in my house for a week, and then I had to move, like pack up my life and move back to New South Wales again. Yeah. So it's just been a whole lot of fun. I'm getting there. I'm just trying to catch up on everything, and I wanted to let the teachers know that like I am here, I'm doing it.
Definitely. I appreciate it. I think it's especially for 217, I think it's, it's quite simple in a way. I think, when we probably don't need to modify any assessment specifically, but we can just change some timelines for you. So I'm keen for you to let me know what you think might be best for the weekly quizzes as well as the mid-semester exam. So if the
mid-semester exam should be fine because that's next week. I would just love to have the opportunity to catch up on those weekly quizzes that I've missed, basically.
Do you want those all open at a particular time, or is there a time frame you think you might work for you best?
I'm going to try and get them done like this week and the start of next week. I've put down that I'm going to do my mid-semester exam on Thursday the 16th. Mm-hmm. So I should have quite a bit of time between now and then to get all of that stuff done.
Yeah, okay.
Because I've taken the week off work because my ribs, like the more that I'm doing, the more it's just putting too much pressure on 3 fractured ribs at the moment. Yeah. So I've taken the week off just to like catch up on that, and I've got so many other assignments to do as well. So
yeah. Okay.
Super happy.
Yeah. Well, what I can do about the weekly quizzes is trying to open those up for you. And then just have them due maybe at the end of next week. But if you need more time, then just let me know.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem at all. And if you struggle, like if there is, like I'll try and open them up, but obviously sometimes there's like a setting I've missed or something like that. So if you do have trouble accessing them, just let me know and I can play around with things and make sure they're open for you.
That's awesome.
Let me know how you go with the mid-semester exam. It sounds like you're probably on track, but yeah, if something does come up and you need more time, then let me know. But also the group research projects. Obviously, we've got Rod here, but if you guys need a little bit more time or there's another way we can support you, then let me know.
Sweet.
With that, so if there's just the 2 of you at the moment, have you guys talked to someone else about coming into the group, or is it just you right now?
So far, it's just us. We work together in our biomechanics, and we seem to be doing pretty well. Yeah. But like, I don't know if someone else from another class wants to join in, like we're more than happy.
Okay, cool.
Is it meant to be groups?
Sorry, Rod, what's that?
Is it meant to be groups of 3?
Yeah, so typically we sort of say groups 3 to 4. So it's something we have had groups of 2 before. Often that's happened because we've had someone fall out or something's happened. So and it's not so much, I think it's definitely doable with 2. There's probably slightly higher workload each, but then also it's a little bit less coordination of a larger group as well. So, you know, trade-off usually isn't too bad. What we might do, because we have a few people who are not assigned to a group yet, for the next week, I might just kind of leave it open. And if we do have 1 or 2 people who come out and say, actually, I don't have a group, then I may sort of contact you guys and say, hey, could this person come and have a chat to you? But if not, if we get to next week and we haven't had anyone joining in the group, then we might just continue with the 2 of you guys.
Yeah, that's easy. And just collecting the data and things like that, just catch me up. Like, do we have to meet up and things like that?
Yeah, so basically the plan for this semester is to collect on yourselves. Ideally, you may not be able to do anything.
I mean, like, I just have to isolate for 14 days because I still have my house in Queensland. This is the other thing, is like I can't get out of a lease that I'm still paying rent in a house.
Yeah, this is unprecedented times for us all. Yeah, I think basically, so we sort of considered options, and we considered, could we supply data for you, or but then that would kind of restrict the design of the experiment, because you'd have to have one sort of type of experiment. So what we're thinking is that generally we sort of like to have at least 10 participants for each group project, but you know, we could still perform stats on a lower number and just go through the process, knowing that it's not the most, you know, it's not the highest external validity or internal validity that we've got in the world. So I think as long as we have 3 or 4 participants, then we can still perform the stats that we want. And then we can, if we can do it at home, that'd be great. But a lot of groups also have, you know, in a house with, you know, 3, 4, 5 other people that they can collect data on. And then so if we can get our data up to sort of close to the 10 mark or beyond, then that's ideal. That's perfect. It's going to factor into the design a little bit as well. Most things that we could have done in class, we could probably do at home. So whether it be a reaction time test or an isometric hold or some sort of other simple task, then we can usually do that at home. But yeah, we just have to make sure, you know, we can do it at home, A, and B, that, you know, the people we're testing it on. So I know the last session we had a group where basically the only people that group could get tested on was their parents. They all just had their mum and dad in their houses. And so they were going to have to modify, they wanted to do push-ups, but then realized that maybe some of the parents couldn't do too many push-ups, so they have to modify the activity a little bit. But yeah, just as long as we can, you know, factor that in, I think most of us should be away with collecting at home.
To classify the research project, does it have to be something like kinetics related, or can it be like, let's say, I don't know, blood pressure related, or like?
You had a look at the topics on the Leo page.
I literally have not been able, like, I've literally just it's been a struggle.
Completely understandable, and I know for sure there's you know, a number of people who haven't, you know, there's a lot of people who aren't in groups yet, people who haven't looked at things. So you're definitely not alone. But what I'd recommend you do is just have a little look through the module on Leo, the group research project module. So there's a group sign up page. I think I've just put you guys in a group for that on there. But then once you can put up your topic once you've chosen one, and a Google Docs link as well. But you also see on top of there a possible topics link to a PDF file. 4 topics: the effect of music on strength, the effect of instruction on exercise performance, distraction on reaction time, and exercise on mood state. So basically, if you can choose one of those topics, then that'll kind of give you a space to design your experiment within. So I don't even mind if it goes outside of that topic a little bit, but it kind of gives you some areas to think about, to say, okay, well, you know, I might do something in this topic, but specifically, you know, the music I want to choose is this, you know, and then the strength test is this, and, you know, so you've got a lot of design options within those different topics.
Sweet.
So what I might do is leave you guys to have a bit more of a chat about that. I'll loop back around to you guys if you're happy to stay on the line, and just see where you're up to with your initial thoughts. But then I think mainly today it's going to be about, you know, how you might track towards, you know, designing that. So it doesn't all need to be today, but how can we sort of get to a point where next week we've got some ideas on the design and what we want to do, so I can give you a bit of feedback then.
Sweet. Okay. Cool.
Right.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'll try and loop back around. If you have to leave before then, that's fine as well, but otherwise I'll see you in a few minutes.
Sweet.
No worries.
Okay. See you guys.
Yeah.
I've had one every week, every Monday.
Hi, Matt.
Hey,
Past 2 weeks. Hi.
how are we going?
Good.
Good.
Awesome.
Venus isn't here today. We think she might be in another class.
Okay.
But we've sort of discussed, like, our topic is the effect of distraction on reaction time.
Yep.
So we were sort of discussing, our main concern initially was our sample size, because like I've got 6 to 7 people I can test in my house,
Yep.
but they're at different ages and some are athletes and some aren't.
Okay.
But then Riley's got more athletes in her family, but she's only got a sample size group of 4. And
Okay.
then as far as we know, Venus lives with one sister, so she's potentially got one person. So we'd be looking at a size of 10 to 11 people. Would that be sufficient for this?
Yeah, definitely. So even if we were collecting in class, probably what we'd be aiming for is a minimum of 10 participants. But obviously, given, you know, the considerations of this semester, I mean, at the bare minimum, if we've got sort of 3 or 4 participants, then we've got enough to run some stats. But the closer we can get to that 10, the better we're actually going to, you know, the results are going to actually be a bit more believable and indicative of what we find in the literature. So I think that, yeah, if you can get it up to that 10 or at least close to it, then I think that's going to be fine. Obviously, we need to think about some of the ethical considerations. So as well as design aspects. So we want to just make sure we're not putting anyone at a higher risk than what they would normally undergo. So, you know, most of us are probably doing some form of exercise at home as best we can, or at least a fit and healthy and otherwise would be doing exercise. So if we do some sort of exercise, that's something that we would, have do fairly simply. If it's people, if we've got any minors involved, then we probably either steer clear of that if we can. If we've, you know, only got 1 or 2 that are under 18 that we've got, then maybe we just sort of don't test them. But if they are an important part of your sample, we just want to make doubly sure that they're that they're consenting with parent consent as well, but also B, that it's we're not exposing them to any high risk of harm.
Okay, so our discussion was, I've got 3 children,
yep.
and we can get to 10 people if we don't include my 6-year-old. Because
Okay.
we were saying he's probably too young to even understand informed consent.
Yep.
But my other kids are like nearly 12 and nearly 13, and they're both athletes,
Yeah.
so they understand. So I think if we did an informed consent process with them and their dad signed something, then it would probably be beneficial to include them.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we could consider. Like, I'd be happy to, if you're happy, and dad's happy and the kids are happy to consent, then that's certainly something that, you know, they would be able to understand. And I'm sure, especially given that they're, you know, like you said, they're athletes, and it's not going to be above and beyond any other, anything that they would typically be doing. So
no,
yeah.
It's a lot less. Like they do volleyball and swimming and weight training, so it's less than what they normally do. We were looking at, do you want to explain the test we were going to do, Riley?
Yeah, so we're looking at doing it's kind of like the ruler test where you drop the ruler and you kind of have to catch it,
yeah.
I guess, with your fingers. So whether we use just our pointer finger and our thumb and just catch it with 2 fingers, or whether we want to do like a full closed grip. We're also considering whether we sit or stand when we do it. And we're also going to involve a distraction, so maybe like audio or media. We weren't too sure about that one though, because whether we just do audio or whether we do like a video where it's audio and visual.
Yeah, definitely. Those are the questions, and often the finer details as well that seem like, okay, we'll do this, and then you're like, oh, there's so many decisions to make.
Yeah.
And it is, yeah, and none of those are really, I guess, you kind of think research is black and white as well, but none of those decisions are black and white. So it all kind of comes back to your research question, and the tendency for most people is to answer more, to try and answer a big question, and then when you get into the detail you realize that it's actually quite complex to do that, especially for this project. In the marking criteria, you notice there's no marks for the how big the question you're answering is, but there is marks around sort of how logical the flow is, how you logically answer the question, things like that. So you're probably better off answering a more specific question really well than trying to have too many, say, independent variables or dependent variables, and not being able to really, sell that story in the 2-page abstract.
Yep.
So you could, with those distractions, you could have, 2 different audible distractions. So you don't have to have a control group, especially if one or both of those distractions have research already in the literature on. So if we know that, a certain audio distraction makes, lessens people's, or sort of makes people's reaction time worse, then we could compare that to a different one. So say, hey, this one's already been tested. We know it affects people's reaction time. We're comparing this one to this one. Or you might just decide to have a control condition versus that, audible. Now, what you probably might not have already noticed from the literature is that in terms of distraction, there's a whole, different categories of distractions. So we might have audible distractions, we'll have visual distractions, there's cognitive distractions, and the cognitive might be, might include something visual or something audible, or it might just be like a computational type thing. So they've got to do like, calculations in your head, or you're considering something else, and we know that affects our perceptions and reaction time and a whole range of other things as well. So there's sort of these areas, and sometimes they're a bit siloed in terms of the research as well.
And would performance anxiety come into that as well? Like where you people performing in front of a crowd,
yeah,
it could impact their reaction time. Like say the Adam Goods thing with the crowd booing. I wonder how much effect that had on his performance on the field because of emotional and also psychological factors.
Yeah, definitely. And that's sort of one that, so for me, I guess those, the topics are something to help you think of different areas and have, rather than the kind of blank slate of like, okay, research anything. But I don't mind if you sort of push the boundaries of those topics a little bit. So if you're thinking about it being a social, aspect of distraction, then whether that be, deliberately people are trying to socially distract someone, or whether that, you're setting up 2 conditions where someone's doing something, by themselves or with one person in a room versus having a couple of people watching or analysing, then I think that's a really interesting design. And yeah, you're definitely right. I think what I know of that literature is that the pressure and anxiety don't necessarily have as much influence on certain physiological capacities, but they do seem to have a significant influence on creativity and decision making.
And would that be like motivation to keep playing sport would probably wane if you're getting a lot of negative feedback in the field?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So it's a really big aspect of like self-determination theory, as well, is if you're, that social aspect. And so, even if you may be feeling like you're built, well, the thing is about the social aspect is that it actually influences all the other aspects. So how good our competency is also based on what others feel about our
perception of whether other people see us as being competent.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And yeah, so it's affecting the social aspect, it's affecting the competency aspect. But, it's social aspects can influence every part of our perception as humans, and so they do influence our motivation in every way.
So from a practical sense, if we tested, say, one distraction being someone yelling and the other distraction being music, do you think that would be like adequate?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's interesting. I think that, you probably want to define what the difference between those actually mean. So in terms of, are we, is it something that we think one's going to put a higher cognitive load, or we think that they're going to affect motivation, and maybe understanding the literature in those areas. You don't need to necessarily, explicitly outline all of that in a 2-page abstract, for example, but it is nice to, in the design, to know why you would want to be, I guess, to justify why you're wanting to look at those two specifically. Sometimes the justification, that is a direct applied question. So there's two conditions that people might have that we can choose from in the applied world, and you want to know how that affects it. Sometimes that's more of a, understanding theories and what might influence it behind our understanding. So in that way, if it's more towards the basic research type design, then you would want to know why, what the justification is for comparing something like yelling versus.
So if we were saying for testing the music, we were looking at sensory overload and how that comes into play with the athlete's performance, and then if we were looking at the stress response or anxiety with the yelling, and whether there's fight and flight comes into play with the athlete when there's a lot of yelling on the field.
I definitely think that's interesting. You probably want to, I guess, again, for simplicity, I would be careful having two experimental conditions that are influencing things in a different way, and it's hard to define how they're influencing it. So if you're thinking about, I think that the thing is, like, yelling versus the music, both potentially could be overloading sort of a performance.
What about the types of music?
Yeah, so this is the thing. So you could make it simple and have two different types of music, or you could have volume. So you could have, like, something at a reasonable volume and something at a very high volume. You could have two different types of music, so whether it be genres or tempo, or it could be, both two, like we've got the yelling versus the music, but both of them are very loud. So we know, okay, well, both of them are obviously something that potentially could overload, but in different ways. And so we're interested in the different forms of an overload. And what you might find is that there would be, one of the things you might want to consider is familiarization with those things. If it's an applied question in a sporting sense, then athletes probably are typically quite used to people yelling and cheering, especially if you're in a sport that noise is allowed, but maybe not as used to sort of loud music blaring. But in other conditions,
I feel like
sometimes it's more loud music.
Yeah, I feel like with the yelling, it's a bit harder to control, because obviously we're doing our research gathering in like different areas, so we can't actually stand there and go, oh, we're going to yell. Like, we can't actually stand there and observe and have the same person yell at all 10 of our subjects, kind of thing. So I felt like if we had two different genres of music, say, like, I don't know, like classical and kind of like hard rock, that's kind of like a soft, kind of like mellow, kind of relaxed music. And then if we had something a bit more, I don't know,
aggressive,
a bit hard, a bit more grungy, then it would be a bit more harder to concentrate.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
So would we play them at the same volume then? Do you reckon? Like, would we play both those loud, or would we test loud and quiet for both styles of music?
I guess if I could probably add to that, I would say, again, I know, and I think this is probably heightened with when people take a bit more of an interest in an area, that risk of biting off a little bit too much and making it end up being complex is probably one that we're going to have to continually fight against. So I think that if you have two independent variables, so the volume and the genre of music, then you're going to end up with 4 different conditions. So you've got this exponential increase in the conditions, and therefore, if you've got 4 different conditions, you're going to have 4 different average reaction times. And so it's not just, one comparison, it's, 1 comparison, 2 comparison, 3 comparison, 4 comparison, 5 comparison, 6 comparison.
Got it. So it blows out and it becomes bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah, that would be I would find it very difficult to give that justice, or to properly introduce both of those independent variables and explain the relevance of those in the discussion, how it fits with all the literature that those hit upon in the discussion of a 2-page abstract. So I think you're probably likely, and I'm not necessarily saying don't, sometimes we collect more data than we need and then choose a little bit later on. So that's possible. But yeah, think about that, as well as just logistics of collecting all those as well. I think your point, Riley, on control is a good one. So the yelling is one that I could see ways you could try to control it. So you'd have maybe a script of what exactly, maybe, try to keep the, the volumes as similar as possible, but it would be harder. The other thing is the reaction time. So you're doing the ruler test. I think that can be done reasonably consistent across different locations with different testers, but you might consider, say, the online reaction test that we did in class the other week as an alternative. So I'd probably either go something as simple as possible, or something that's answering more of an applied question. So, something that involves, catching a ball, or reacting to something in a physical sense.
If we do a catching the ball type test, it could be a bit more difficult because my parents-in-law are 2 of the people that are participating potentially. So I don't know. I'm sure my father-in-law could. He played pro rugby league back in the 70s, but I don't know if my mother-in-law could catch a ball.
Definitely. No, that's a really important consideration. So I think what you want to steer clear of is ceiling effects. So you don't want to, we want everyone to be able to, or the data for between the 2 conditions to be able to tease out. And if you've got someone who catches 0 balls in both conditions, then you're not teasing out any difference or similarity. So you do want to make sure the task is something that people can not only do,
but it does simplify things if we use that online test, because it's going to be pretty much the same for anyone on the computer.
I know, I just didn't know whether we were allowed to, because we already used it in class, but I guess if we're including the audio or the sensory overload, then it is technically a different experiment to what we did in class.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the same. I think that, over the next week or 2, you definitely, I think what the next steps, they're also going to be exploring a lot of the literature in this area. And so if you find an experimental design out there, don't think that you can't use or lean on that heavily for your own design. So, you can use pretty much the same experiment as others, but then modify something very slightly. And that's quite a legitimate way to build on the research. Or you could, better identify where your research is in the gap of certain literature that might not be right next to any others. And that's good as well. So don't feel like you're, going to copy anyone's research design. Very similar.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we should get into too many more specifics without Venus here. I think maybe we should just get on to doing our Google Doc and collate our information, and then start looking at research this week.
I think we definitely can chuck down what we've kind of talked about on there as well, so she can have a little look and flick us a message about that.
It's really good to be able to chat about some of those with you guys, and I think that you're right. From here, the next steps are thinking, how do we get to next week, where we kind of want a bit of a draft? We've kind of got one already, we're talking about it here, but kind of saying, okay, we're thinking, these 2 conditions, roughly this many participants, this is our research question, this is the kind of data we're collecting, and then I can give you a bit more feedback next week before we start to put it in the drafts for week 8, and then we can start collecting from there.
Cool. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions about the mid-semester exam or the unit or the project before I head off?
All right. I just got to go through it all again.
We were talking about the exam at the beginning of this, And we were both saying we feel pretty good on like the general knowledge. We just need to look at some of those subcategories in a bit more depth and look at how that knowledge is applied so that we're understanding it a bit deeper.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the best practice is going to be reading abstracts and identifying those.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm sure it sounds to me like you're very much on track.
Yeah.
Cool.
Maybe we can do like make a mini Kahoot each and with some of the stuff we're studying, and then we can just share it on our group, on our text group, and we can try each other's out. That might be a good way to study.
Yeah. We could choose how many? There's 4 kind of like subcategories, like or 5. Is that up to week 6 or week 5?
It'll be up to week 6, so everything,
Okay.
including academic writing, up to and including academic writing. So so in terms of, there's all the different categorizations in terms of applied, basic, and the quantitative versus qualitative. In terms of the experimental, non-experimental, there are like 5 subcategories. So that's going to be important. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll have one more week and where I can answer questions next week in the video conference. But yeah, sounds to me like at the moment you guys are on track. But if you have any questions during the week, just let me know.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, come on.
You are the most surprised I've ever seen Harriet on a video so far.
Sorry, I just got a bit of
We've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, sorry guys, it took a while to get around to all the different groups. How are you going?
Yeah, pretty good. We just have a few questions on the kind of the drafts that are like June 26th. With the document information letter to participants, are we writing like 7 different paragraphs based on the things? Like,
so you got the template, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically just following that template. So it will be, I think it's about that long, 6 or 7 paragraphs, something like that. But then also just match it up with the marking criteria. So there's some aspects in the marking criteria that you won't necessarily find prompts for in the template. So I think like stuff like outlining the risks and how you're minimizing those risks. I don't think features in the template that heavily, but it is important in terms of the marking criteria. So just making sure you've got some information in there about that. So it shouldn't be too difficult because you've got the template and the criteria there, but yeah. Also, I'm happy, like, remember the draft is not, I'm not going to mark you on those drafts you send through. So they're a chance for me to have a look at those before you start collecting data. And it also seconds as an opportunity to give you a bit of feedback on those. So you might submit it as a draft in week 8 and I would say, hey, look, the research looks really good, or hey, maybe think about tweaking this aspect before you collect data. But also before you submit, the final copy, you might want to tweak this in the information sheet and you might want to add a little bit more detail to your justification in the application form.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that makes more sense.
Yeah, cool. So what are you thinking in terms of like research question and design?
Oh, we were about like our topic.
Yeah.
Oh, we were planning on doing effect of instruction on
Exercise performance.
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Yeah, exercise performance.
Yeah, what specifically, have you got any ideas around the types of instruction you might give and the performance that you're testing?
Well, we were just like trying to break down like the type of instruction, I guess, like what were we talking about, guys? How to like out like we were talking about swimming, for example, and like Harriet, back me up here, please.
Well, no, we were just saying like how you have to say a different instruction to get something out of like activity.
Specific things, I guess.
Oh, the specific activity of the swimming. Wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh, she said I'm like freestyle. How it's like it was a
like the
long drag
specific
of the
drill. Remember the drills? And
Yeah.
like to like work on that stuff. Like
it was. I don't know how we're relating this back right now. It's just the same instruction like when doing the activity basically.
I think I'm kind of following along. So you're, obviously in a task like swimming, which maybe you guys are familiar with, there's definitely, there's different types of instructions that you might give. And so we probably find that a little bit in the literature as well, that there's, there's specific instructions, or there might be instructions that are a little bit more vague. There's more performance-based instruction or outcome-focused, or there's more technique-based instruction. There might be an external focus of instruction. So you might be saying, okay, reach the other side, or, do this in terms of the overall performance, or get a ball here in terms of location. Or it might be a more internal or sort of body-based technique instruction. So move your arm here, or make sure if you feel strong through the leg action or something like that. So there's lots of different types of instruction that we could sort of narrow down or get drilled down on for the experiment. The other thing you're going to have to decide on is the actual performance. So obviously swimming's probably not going to be possible in our houses unless you guys have pools and all can collect data with a number of people and have some performance outcome. But I'm guessing it's going to have to be something a little bit more simple that you can do around the house. So that's probably something as well that I might just get a bit of a gauge from you guys, because if we're collecting on yourself and anyone else you might have in the house with you, what sort of numbers are we working with at the moment?
like how many people are in our household?
Yeah, that you could collect data on.
Well, I've got 4 people in my household.
Okay. Harriet?
Yeah,
I've got 5.
as well.
5. Rubina, you said 4, did you?
4, yeah.
Yeah. And
I've got 4 too.
4. Okay.
Oh,
Cool.
maybe we just go 4 then.
Well, so basically, if it was in class, what we'd want is a sort of a minimum of 10 participants, or 10 sets of data for each group. And usually we have both participants doing both conditions, for example. So I think that would still be the ideal. So if you've got 4 in each household, then you should be able to get up to 10 fairly easily, which means we could not only run our stats, but have some results that should be pretty indicative of what we'd find if we tested a larger group. If there are going to be some groups this semester who can't get to 10, or can only connect 4 or 5 people amongst themselves, which is fine. I think as long as we can run stats, I think that's the most important aspect. But obviously the other consideration is the logistics. So can we do it simply in our home? So if you guys are dealing with an exercise performance, then you'd probably just do something that you can do around the house. So it might be number of sit-ups in a minute, or it might be an isometric hold, or it might be an accuracy task. So it could be like throwing balls into a bucket or something like that, that you could do fairly simply around the house, and you could all do it each at your own place.
Okay.
So it sounds like we're probably at the fairly early stages of designing that experiment, which is fine. I think there's a pretty wide spectrum at the moment, so some people aren't in groups yet. So I think probably the major thing is going to be figuring out a plan of how we're going to get to next week, where we have some draft ideas of what we're doing. So, what's the independent variable? Are we comparing 2 conditions or 3 conditions? Are we, what are they going to be? What's the exercise performance, and what are we actually measuring in that? If we've got different conditions, are they going to be randomized in terms of order? How are we going to look at that data? So all those things, I think if we can have an idea of all of those by next week, then I can give you some feedback on, maybe restricting some of those, or maybe justifications for some of those, just to make sure that, we can get all that in a draft by the following week, and we can start data collection in week sort of 9. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Any questions that you guys might have on the project while I'm here?
Did we have anything else, Harriet? I know we were talking about.
Oh gosh. No, I think that was it for the oh no, there was something else. I can't remember. Oh, this was a different assessment though. It was the hurdle, at the end of the one.
Yeah, the competency
You
exam.
know, the pass or fail one.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that like an actual written exam, or is it like, actually no, never mind. I think I just answered my own question.
No, so it'll be, in the past, what we've done is in an in-class version, we basically give you an Excel file with data in it, and then we ask you a series of stats questions. So simple descriptive stuff from what's the mean of this data here, or standard deviation or whatever, through to things like, inferential statistics. So we'll be doing things like t-tests and correlations and stuff like that. So we might ask you like, what's the probability that these two data sets, the difference between these two data sets is due to random chance. So by week 12, you'll know that that's a p-value of a t-test. You'll know the function to be able to do that, and you'll just give the answer and be able to understand and put it down. Now, in class, we would do that. You have the questions and answers on a paper sheet, but the way we're going to do it online is just to do the same thing, but probably on a quiz on Leo. So we'll just have a multi-choice or a quiz that will have you'll be able to enter the data in the short answer space. So you just enter the number in. We'll also have an Excel file that you'll open.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
We'll probably run it similar to the mid-semester exam and the content quizzes, where we'll just have it open for a period and you can access it when you want during that period.
Mm-hmm. And that's still the pass or fail.
It's a pass or fail. So yeah, so we set the pass rate at 60%. We very rarely, I think the last couple of semesters, no one's got below 60%. So I don't think you'll have a problem with it. But even if you do happen to do poorly in it, then we'll just give you another opportunity to do it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions?
I think that was it.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you.
How about the rest of are we all on track for the mid-semester exam thing?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. If you have any, obviously we've got one more video conference where we'll chat sort of a little bit more about or just some final stuff, prep for mid-semester exam. But if you have any questions during the week, then just let me know.
Thank you.
Cool. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the video conference next week.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
How you going?
Hi.
Sorry, around to everyone.
We have Andreas from your 10 a.m. class on the line.
Okay.
Are we allowed to be in a group from someone from the other class?
As long as they're not, in a group from the other class.
Yeah. We had no idea.
I can't see Andreas in a group.
No, he's on my telephone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I mean, in the sign-up page, I can't see.
Yeah, he wouldn't be yet. So we just thought it'd be easier because we're on the same biomechanics group. So just kind of.
Yeah, cool. You could probably also tell Andreas he can. I don't mind. Like if maybe next week if he can attend this time for the video conference, then he can just.
Yeah.
Did you hear that, Andreas?
No, I glitched out a bit.
Okay, so for now, like with us being in our group, just come and join us on the 12 o'clock Zoom call.
Okay. All right. I'll jump on now.
Okay.
I don't have it downloaded on my laptop, but I'll come on now.
Oh no, that's all good.
Yeah.
Easy as. All right, so we'll see you in a sec.
All right.
Bye.
Just a quick question, Matt. What's
I'll send it now.
amount of people that we can have for our testing? Like you said, obviously ideally 10, but with this going on at the moment, it's not that easy to get access.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's definitely going to be groups who can't get up to 10. So I think 10 and beyond is the ideal. But for this semester, knowing that obviously we've got, it's going to be tricky for some people, then I think if we can get, as long as we can get sort of 4 or more, we can run the stats. we need to. It might not be super indicative of, you know, the findings of what we find of outside. So if we find no difference, we might sort of say, okay, well, you know, the sample size was pretty low, so that's a restriction of the study, but you're not going to get marked down for that this semester.
We basically have to find studies that have already done the same thing, right? And just kind of do our own.
Not necessarily. That's certainly something. Yeah, that's certainly something you could do. So one way is to you know, look at other research and find something that, you know, you could reproduce or you're kind of interested in, and then just change something slightly. So maybe they've looked at you know, just males and going to look at males and females, or maybe they've got asked a slightly different question, and you're, you know, wanting to extend that a little bit. So you can definitely base it on research that someone else has done and then build on that. But it doesn't have to be. You can do it, you know, a completely different method that no one has done, but you just want to be aware of where that sits in the current literature. So where it becomes the gap, what, you know, the findings or the outcome of your research might have in terms of like the relevance in the literature.
Yeah, like it just has to line up with other studies out there, but we can make our own.
Which almost like anything you can come up with would align with some other research, but you've like just being aware of that is going to be able to, well, it's going to help you set up the need for your research in the introduction, and it's also going to help you establish the relevance and links that you need in your discussion.
Yeah. So if we were to do like effects of music on strength, if we just, let's just say we had like 6 to 8 people and we got them to do like a maximum amount of push-ups with no music, then we got them to choose their preferred amount of music on like a different day and try to perform the same exercise. Would that kind of be like something along the lines of what we have to do?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's
to like pick the same music for everyone.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of decision you make. So I think that there's this kind of the extraneous variables we were talking about before. Like if you constrain the specific song, then I think that in some ways takes away a lot of the extraneous variables of like tempo. I mean, there are obviously other things like volume there that could potentially make a difference. But I think the self-selection is probably not a bad idea either, because then
there's studies.
Yeah, one of the big things that we find about, one of the big things that could affect you in terms of your ability to perform a task is distraction, which is often to do with cognitive overload, which is then in turn to do with familiarity. So
that makes sense.
I'm just going to assign Andreas to our room. He's just come in.
Yep.
So yeah, if you assign a particular song, then some people will be familiar with that and some people won't. Whereas if you let people select what music or song they like to listen to, then we know that people are going to be familiar with it. So you're controlling it just in a different way. And it answers a slightly different research question as well. So both of those are fine.
Okay.
You just need to sort of understand the sort of why you're making that decision.
Okay.
If you're, there we go. Hey, Andreas.
Hey.
How you going?
Pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So Andreas, I've added you to on the sign up link for the Google Sheet on the from the Leo page. I've added you to this group, and so if you just wanted to come from now on to the video conferences at 12, then I'll just you guys can keep connecting together through that.
Yep, that works well.
Yep, awesome. So we're just talking a little about design choices and things like that. So the number of participants, as long as you guys have sort of roughly around 4, the more you can have, the better. But testing yourselves and anyone else you can around the house, I think as long as we have enough to run stats, then we'll be fine. And then
that's fine.
Yeah, you can typically if we ran it in class and we had 20 people in the class, then we'd want to test it on at least 10 people and not ourselves. But we're not in those conditions, so yeah, that's definitely something that could influence the results. But I think that for this semester, the design and the collection of data and all those things we can kind of achieve by still collecting on ourselves.
Is the other option, especially for like obviously us being in isolation, is like getting mates to do it? Like, could I easily say to a friend like, hey, do it today when you go home, and then
Yeah, for sure. As long as we're not, I guess we just need to, think about the ethics aspect of, as long as we're not exposing people to an increased risk. So if it's if it's an activity they do at home without exposing themselves to risk. So you mentioned the push-ups potentially, Rod. If we've got fit and healthy people who are probably going to be doing, who are familiar with push-ups, then getting them to do a maximal push-up set is probably not going to introduce them to any greater risk of harm. So yeah, it's definitely something you could help friends administer without actually having to be in the house with them.
Yeah.
If we could make a viral video and get a very big data set.
Oh, that's the do 10, see 10, tag 10 thing. Ugh.
Yeah. So yeah, as long as we're not exposing people to greater risk of harm, and I guess the other aspect in terms of design, we want to make sure we can control it. So if as long as they're performing it in a similar condition that we can be confident of, then yeah, that's good. So yeah, I think that's probably a nice start. The idea of the push-ups, and it was it distraction?
The music,
that's right. So you're going to have to make a lot of decisions. It's kind of like designing a house. You're kind of like, okay, this is the type of house I want. That's great, but then you've got to think about the doorknobs and the the floor and different rooms and all that sort of stuff. So same with the research design elements. So if you're doing a push-up test, then is it once to maximal? Are you doing multiple sets? Are you doing 2 different conditions? So you're doing no music and music, or you're doing 2 different conditions, both with music. So maybe you're doing 2 different songs, or one song they're familiar with and one song they're not familiar with. Or are you, and if you're doing both of those, is everyone doing both of those conditions? If so, is it a crossover design? So, we'd have some people, their first condition they do is with the music, and then the next condition they do on a different day is without the music, or is everyone doing the music first? So all of those things have got to be kind of sorted out. I don't, you guys are just starting to talk about it today. So I think probably what we do is set the target of having some draft ideas of those, having some idea of what you want to do by next week in the video chat. And then I can give you a bit of feedback and answer any questions. And then we'll kind of be ready to do the drafts to submit in week 8.
Sweet.
We're in week 7 now.
Sorry, Andres, that was a good. Sorry.
Are we week 7?
Week 6.
6. Yeah. So.
Cool. So this week's week 6. Week 7, you've got the mid-semester exam that opens up on Wednesday through to Sunday, so you can do it anytime during there. We've got the video chat before that on Tuesday. You've also got the descriptive stats quiz to finish, over these 2 weeks. Then week 8, you'll submit the draft for the group research project, so I can approve it, and you can collect data in week 9, 10, analyze in week 11, and submit it in week 12.
And with the mini quizzes, will they ever open to see which answers we got wrong?
The answer's probably not en masse. If you're interested in a particular quiz and say, hey, Matt, like which questions did I get wrong, I'm happy to look that up for you. But yeah, the difficulty with releasing it en masse to everyone is that we then basically give out the data set of questions. So we've got for each quiz we have about 5 or 6 different alternate questions. So question 1 has 6 different options. So if we release that to everyone, then we kind of have to come up with a whole data set again for next year, which is hard.
That's fair.
Yeah. But yeah, definitely, I completely get the point around feedback and wanting to know the results though. So yeah, if you've got
I thought I nailed the last one, but I only got half of it right.
If you want to shoot me an email, I can just tell you which questions you got wrong if you want.
Too easy. Yeah, I'll do that.
Cool. All right, guys, any questions on project, mid-semester exam, anything else in the unit before we head off?
No, I think we're pretty.
Thank you for that, Matt.
Awesome, no worries.
Poops.
Sweet. All right, okay, I'll leave it up to you guys to go into the project stuff, and then I'll catch you guys next week.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Matt.
Okay, no worries. See ya.
Yeah.